Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another one of our Focus Fridays. Tonight, I just wanted to talk to you about this concept of leaving a legacy. I don't know if you followed along with what happened this week, but on Tuesday, one of God's generals moved home. Ravi Zacharias, this week on Tuesday, passed away after a very short but intense battle with cancer. And for those of you who don't know who he is, he was probably the greatest apologist of our time and one of the greatest men of God who ever walked this earth. He had an incredible gift to defend the gospel, to speak the gospel, and to really stand for truth. And so I can imagine the standing ovation he got in heaven as he walked in through those gates on Tuesday. And we both mourn the loss of him here, but I can imagine that heaven was rejoicing to welcome such a wonderful saint back home into heaven. But again, when I think of Ravi and the legacy that he left, it made me really think about us as the church here and now. We have this both challenge to live in these times, but also the privilege of living in these times that are so unprecedented. You've heard those words, unprecedented and unusual. And, but God has chosen you and I to live here for such a time as this. And it makes me think about, when I think of people, incredible men of God like Ravi Zacharias and the legacy that he left, it has made me think this week a lot about what kind of legacy I want to leave. And I want to challenge you tonight to think about what kind of legacy you're leaving. See, the reality is that we live in a society that at its very core is very self-centered and self-focused. And so a lot of people live their life in such a way that they accomplish what they want for their own self. But the Bible actually challenges us to live very differently, to actually live selflessly and to be selfless with our actions, to be selfless with our investments, and to invest into others, and to leave a legacy for those around us, and to leave a legacy for our children. And so tonight, church, I want you to take a moment and stop and think about what kind of legacy that you want to leave. My dad passed away many, many years ago now, 15 years ago, but I had the privilege about 1 week before he died to have a phone conversation with him. He lived in Sweden, and we talked every now and then on the phone, but this was one of those really long conversations. And we got talking about all those meaningful things and actually about this concept of what you want to leave behind. And I had the privilege to actually be able to talk with my dad about those things and thank him for the legacy that he left to me. Because my dad, for those of you who don't know him or didn't hear anything about him, he was an incredible man of God that left a legacy of loving Jesus and preaching the gospel and obeying Christ. And, he left that legacy to me. And thankfully, I had a chance to talk to him about that, which was very wonderful. But I want to leave that legacy for my children. And I think, church, if we can take a moment tonight to think about how we live our lives and what kind of legacy we want to leave, that also affects how we choose to live from this moment on. So a couple of the things that I think really affect this concept of what kind of legacy we leave is to know what we believe. The reality is that we value the things that are important to us. And we also invest in what we value. And so I encourage you, church, today that if you truly value your faith, if you value the Word of God, if you value your relationship with Christ, then I encourage you to invest in it. Because the best way that you can leave a lasting legacy is to invest into your faith and to know what you believe. The second thing is this: I think that we need to stand firm in the truth. Again, the truth being the Word of God. See, we're bombarded in our society today with a lot of different types of truths, with a lot of different lies, with a lot of different versions of what people think is the truth. But as Christians, it's so important for us to stand firm in the truth, in the Word of God. Psalm 119, 105, one of my favorite verses says that your Word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And then in the same Psalm 119, verse 11, it also says, your word I have hidden in my heart that I may not sin against you. Again, it's a wonderful thing to stand firm on the truth of the Word of God, because that's actually the indicator in our lives so that we live in a way that pleases God, so that we may not sin against Him. And so tonight, church, I encourage you, when you think about this concept of what legacy you're leaving, stand firm in the truth of the Word of God. Just like Ravi Zacharias, he dedicated his life to sharing that truth, to sharing the Word, because that's what he has now left behind. I encourage you as well to stand firm in the truth. The next thing is this, that we need to defend the faith. Paul speaks these powerful words in Romans 1:16, where he says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this is why he goes on to say, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. Church, today I encourage you not only to stand firm in truth, but to also be ready to defend the faith. Actually, Paul goes so far as to say that we should preach the gospel and to be ready to share in season and out of season. That's what he says in 2 Timothy 4:2. Because the reality is that when you are convinced on something, when you have something that's important to you, you want to share it. So I encourage you, church, in this season, in this time, I encourage you to share the gospel, to defend the gospel, and to stand for that truth in the midst of the world that we live in. Because at the end of the day, what legacy you pass along will come from the values that you hold the dearest to you. And so when I think of Ravi and when I think of people like Billy Graham and other incredible faith heroes, church, let us honor them and honor their legacy by also picking up the baton, because I believe we live in a time right now where we're not to wait for the next faith hero to come along, but God is actually waiting for you and for I to pick up the baton, to run the race that is set before us, like Hebrews 12:1 says, and to take that baton that they handed to us and to preach the gospel, to stand firm in the word, to let it be our anchor that keeps us in the midst of this storm and in many other storms. And when you do that, church, you leave a legacy that is worth following. And so tonight, let us honor the heroes that have gone before us, not only by honoring their memory, but by living in a way that will continue to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thank you, church, tonight for tuning in, and be blessed as we go into this weekend.